The pain you feel is not because life is cruel, and it is not because you are weak. It is because you are still holding on to what has already ended. Buddhism teaches that healing does not begin when things improve, but when attachment dissolves. You do not need to explain yourself. You do not need closure. You do not need revenge, validation, or answers. The moment you stop reaching for what is no longer reaching back, your soul begins to breathe again. This video is not about losing people or giving up on life. It is about letting go quietly, so your mind can finally rest and your heart can heal completely. If you are ready to release without noise, without guilt, and without fear, stay with me, because what you are about to hear may be the most peaceful decision you ever make. 1. Stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided. One of the deepest and most exhausting wounds to the soul comes from trying to be understood by people who have already made up their minds about you. These are not people who are curious about your truth or open to seeing you clearly. They are people who listen only to confirm their own assumptions. Buddhism teaches that this behavior pulls you into attachment, and attachment is where suffering quietly grows. When you feel the urge to repeatedly explain your intentions, your decisions, your boundaries, or your personal growth, what is really happening is that you are asking for permission to exist as you are. Over time, this constant explaining becomes a form of self-abandonment, because instead of honoring your inner truth, you begin shaping yourself around how others choose to see you. The mind often believes that if you explain enough, clarify enough, or justify yourself with the right words, understanding will eventually arrive. But Buddhism reminds us that understanding does not come from words alone. It comes from openness. When someone has already decided who you are, no amount of explanation will change their perspective, because they are not listening to learn. They are listening to defend their story. Each time you engage in this cycle, you give away your peace, your energy, and your dignity. You begin to feel drained, frustrated, and unseen, not because you failed to communicate, but because you spoke to a closed heart. Silence, in this situation, is not weakness, avoidance, or emotional withdrawal. Silence is wisdom. Silence is self-respect. Letting go quietly means recognizing when explanation becomes unnecessary and choosing to step back instead of leaning forward. It means understanding that your worth does not require validation from people who are unwilling to see you fully. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop negotiating your identity. You stop shrinking your truth to fit someone else's comfort. You allow others to think what they want, while you remain rooted in who you know you are. Buddhism teaches that those who truly see you will not need long explanations, repeated defenses, or emotional justifications. They feel your sincerity through your actions, your consistency, and your presence. And those who demand endless explanations will never be satisfied, because their dissatisfaction does not come from confusion, but from resistance. When you finally release the urge to justify yourself, something profound happens inside you. The mind becomes quieter, the body relaxes, the heart feels lighter. The energy that was once leaking outward in the form of explanations returns inward, where it restores balance, confidence, and peace. This is not giving up. This is waking up. This is choosing inner harmony over endless emotional labor. 2. Accept that some connections are seasonal, not permanent. One of the quiet truths that Buddhism teaches is that nothing in life is meant to remain unchanged. Yet the human heart often suffers because it tries to freeze moments, people, and relationships in time. We meet someone during a certain phase of our life, and because they were present during our growth, our pain, or our healing, we assume they are meant to stay forever. But impermanence is not cruelty. It is the natural rhythm of existence. Some connections arrive to teach you something, to support you during a transition, or to awaken a part of you that was asleep, and once that purpose is fulfilled, the connection begins to loosen. Suffering begins when you resist this natural ending and try to hold on out of fear, nostalgia, or attachment. Many people experience deep emotional pain, not because a relationship ended, but because they believed it was supposed to last indefinitely. Buddhism reminds us that attachment to permanence in an impermanent world creates inner conflict. You replay memories, question yourself, and wonder what you could have done differently, not realizing that the relationship may have already completed its role in your life. Letting go quietly means understanding that not every departure is a rejection. Sometimes it is simply life redirecting both people in different directions. When you accept this truth, you stop personalizing endings and begin honoring what was, instead of resenting what is no longer. Letting go in silence does not mean erasing the past or pretending the connection never mattered. It means allowing gratitude to exist alongside acceptance. You can appreciate what a person gave you without demanding that they remain. You can respect the season they shared with you without dragging it into a future where it no longer belongs. Buddhism teaches that clinging to what has ended blocks new growth. When your hands are full of what has already passed, you cannot receive what is arriving. By releasing people with grace rather than resistance, you create space within yourself for peace, maturity, and deeper understanding. There is also great wisdom in not forcing closure where clarity has already been given through silence, distance, or change. Not every ending requires a final conversation, emotional explanations, or dramatic goodbyes. Sometimes the ending itself is the message. Letting go quietly means trusting that life does not take without reason, and it does not remove without purpose. When you stop chasing people who are drifting away and stop begging seasons to return, your heart slowly softens. The pain loses its sharpness, the longing fades, and your soul begins to rest. This acceptance restores emotional balance and allows you to move forward without bitterness, carrying lessons instead of wounds. 3. Release the need to be chosen by everyone. One of the most silent yet painful attachments a person carries is the need to be chosen, approved, and validated by others. Buddhism teaches that this craving for acceptance binds your sense of worth to forces outside your control, and when your value depends on how others see you, your inner peace becomes fragile. From a very early age, many people learn to adjust their behavior, silence their truth, or soften their boundaries in order to be liked, welcomed, or included. Over time, this habit becomes so natural that you may not even realize how much of yourself you are giving away just to remain acceptable in the eyes of others. This is where quiet suffering begins, because the more you chase approval, the further you drift from your authentic self. The mind often convinces you that if you are kind enough, patient enough, understanding enough, or helpful enough, you will eventually be chosen by everyone. But Buddhism reminds us that being chosen by all is neither possible nor necessary. Every person views the world through their own conditioning, wounds, fears, and expectations. No matter how sincere you are, some people will misunderstand you, overlook you, or decide you are not for them. When this happens, attachment to being chosen turns into self-doubt. You begin questioning your worth, replaying interactions, and wondering what you should have done differently, not realizing that rejection is often a reflection of incompatibility, not inadequacy. Letting go in silence means recognizing that your value does not increase when someone chooses you, and it does not decrease when someone walks away. You stop measuring your worth through invitations, responses, attention, or validation. You no longer chase people who are unsure about you, Because you understand that clarity is a form of respect. Buddhism teaches that peace arises when you stop begging to belong in places where your presence is merely tolerated instead of appreciated. When you release the need to be chosen, you free yourself from emotional dependency and reclaim your inner authority. There is also great healing in understanding that being chosen by yourself is more important than being chosen by anyone else. When you stand firmly in your truth, some people may drift away, not because you became less valuable, but because you became more aligned. Letting go quietly means allowing people to make their choices without chasing, arguing, or proving your worth. You remain calm, grounded, and centered, trusting that those who are meant to resonate with you will do so naturally. As this attachment dissolves, your heart becomes lighter, your confidence becomes quieter yet stronger, and your soul begins to rest in the freedom of self-acceptance. This is not isolation. This is self-respect. This is the restoration of inner peace through non-attachment. 4. Detach from outcomes and learn to trust the flow of life. One of the most subtle yet powerful sources of suffering is attachment to outcomes. Buddhism teaches that pain often does not come from what happens, but from our insistence on how things should happen. The mind creates expectations about people, relationships, efforts, and timelines. And when reality does not align with these expectations, disappointment arises. You plan how something should unfold, how others should respond, and how life should reward your patience or effort. Without realizing it, you begin living more in the future than in the present, constantly measuring your experience against imagined results. This attachment slowly steals your peace, because the present moment is never enough when you are obsessed with what it must become. Detaching from outcomes does not mean giving up effort or becoming passive. Buddhism does not teach indifference, but non-attachment. You still act with sincerity, intention, and care, but you release the need to control the final result. Letting go quietly means you do your part fully, then step back and allow life to unfold in its own rhythm. When you cling to outcomes, every delay feels like failure, every change feels like betrayal, and every unexpected turn feels like loss. But when you release that grip, you begin to see that life often knows paths your mind cannot yet understand. What appears as a setback may be protection. What feels like rejection may be redirection. Healing begins when you trust that not everything is meant to arrive in the form you imagined. Many people exhaust themselves emotionally by replaying scenarios, analyzing decisions, and worrying about future results. Buddhism teaches that this mental grasping creates suffering long before anything actually happens. Letting go in silence means you stop demanding guarantees from life. You accept uncertainty as part of the human experience, instead of resisting it. When you release the obsession with outcomes, the nervous system relaxes, the mind becomes clearer, and the heart becomes steadier. You begin to respond to life instead of fighting it. You move with awareness rather than anxiety. There is deep freedom in understanding that your responsibility lies in your actions, not in the reactions of others or the final shape of events. You cannot control how people respond, how situations unfold, or how long certain processes take. Buddhism reminds us that control is an illusion that creates tension. Trust, on the other hand, creates peace. Letting go quietly means allowing life to teach you through experience rather than forcing it to obey your expectations. Over time, this trust restores balance within you. You become more patient, more resilient, and less shaken by change. When outcomes no longer define your emotional state, your soul regains its natural rhythm, and life begins to feel lighter, even in uncertainty. 5. Stop carrying guilt for choosing your peace. One of the heaviest burdens a human being carries is guilt for choosing their own peace. Buddhism teaches that suffering does not only come from pain inflicted by others, but also from the inner conflict we create when we believe we must sacrifice ourselves to be considered good, kind, or worthy. Many people grow up learning that saying no is selfish, that creating distance is cruel, and that prioritizing their own emotional well-being is something to feel ashamed of. Over time, this belief becomes deeply rooted, and even when chaos, disrespect, or emotional exhaustion overwhelms them, they stay out of guilt rather than love. This is where silent suffering begins, because the heart knows it needs peace, but the mind punishes itself for seeking it. Choosing peace often means stepping away from environments that drain you, relationships that confuse you, or patterns that keep reopening old wounds. Yet instead of feeling relief, many people feel guilt. They question themselves, replay conversations, and wonder if they are being too sensitive, too distant, or too cold. Buddhism reminds us that compassion without wisdom becomes self-harm. You are not required to endure emotional pain just to prove that you are caring. True compassion includes yourself. Letting go quietly means understanding that protecting your inner calm is not an act of cruelty, but an act of clarity. Guilt often arises when you confuse responsibility with self-sacrifice. You believe it is your duty to fix others, to absorb their emotions, or to remain present, even when the cost to your well-being is too high. Buddhism teaches that each being walks their own path, carries their own karma, and must learn their own lessons. When you carry guilt for choosing peace, you are unconsciously taking responsibility for emotions that are not yours to hold. Letting go in silence means releasing this misplaced responsibility. You stop explaining why you need space. You stop justifying your boundaries. You trust that those who respect you will understand, and those who do not were benefiting from your lack of boundaries anyway. There is also deep healing in recognizing that peace is not something you earn after enduring suffering long enough. Peace is a natural state that arises when you stop resisting your own needs. Buddhism teaches that the body and mind send signals when something is wrong. Chronic exhaustion, anxiety, resentment, and emotional numbness are not signs of weakness. They are signs that your inner balance has been disturbed. Choosing peace is an act of listening to these signals instead of silencing them. When you ignore them out of guilt, suffering multiplies. When you honor them, healing begins. Letting go quietly means releasing the need to be understood when you choose peace. Not everyone will agree with your boundaries, and not everyone will applaud your decision to step back. Some people may accuse you of changing, becoming distant, or prioritizing yourself too much. Buddhism teaches that attachment to others' opinions binds you to their expectations. When you stop carrying guilt, you allow others to feel however they choose without absorbing their reactions as truth. You understand that discomfort in others does not mean you did something wrong. Often, it simply means the dynamic has shifted. As guilt dissolves, something subtle yet powerful happens within you. Your nervous system begins to relax. The constant inner tension fades. You no longer feel the need to over-explain, over-apologize, or overcompensate. You become quieter, steadier, and more grounded. Peace no longer feels like something you must defend. It becomes something you inhabit naturally. Buddhism teaches that when inner harmony is restored, the mind becomes clearer and the heart becomes lighter. You move through life with less resistance and more presence. Choosing peace also reshapes your relationships. You no longer stay out of obligation, fear, or guilt. You stay where there is mutual respect, emotional safety, and understanding. And when something no longer aligns with your well-being, you let go without hatred, drama, or resentment. Letting go quietly means you do not announce your departure or seek validation for your decision. You simply honor yourself and move forward. This silent self-respect heals wounds that words never could. In the end, Buddhism teaches that peace is not selfish. Peace is necessary. A calm mind creates clarity. A clear heart creates wisdom. When you stop carrying guilt for choosing your peace, you stop fighting yourself. You stop betraying your inner truth. And in that stillness, your soul begins to heal completely. This is not withdrawal from life. This is learning how to live without constantly breaking yourself for others. Leo, accept that not everyone will grow with you. One of the most painful realizations on the path of inner growth is understanding that not everyone who once walked beside you will continue walking with you. Buddhism teaches that growth is not a collective movement. It is deeply individual. Each person awakens at their own pace, according to their own readiness, karma, and life experiences. Yet the heart often resists this truth. You want the people you love to evolve with you, to understand the changes within you, and to support the direction you are moving toward. When this does not happen, confusion and sorrow arise, not because anyone has done something wrong, but because expectations were silently formed. As you grow, your values begin to shift. What once felt normal may begin to feel heavy. Conversations that once energized you may begin to drain you. Environments that once felt safe may start to feel limiting. Buddhism teaches that this discomfort is not a sign of arrogance or superiority. It is a sign of alignment changing. Growth naturally creates distance, and distance is not always abandonment. Sometimes it is simply life rearranging connections so that each person can continue their journey in the way they need to. Suffering begins when you resist this separation and try to pull others forward or hold yourself back to preserve familiarity. Many people delay their own healing because they fear outgrowing relationships. They silence their truth, suppress their insight, and shrink their awareness to avoid making others uncomfortable. Buddhism reminds us that clinging to sameness is a form of attachment, and attachment prevents transformation. Letting go quietly means allowing yourself to grow without guilt and allowing others to remain where they are without judgment. You stop dragging people who are not ready, and you stop allowing yourself to be anchored to past versions of your life. This acceptance brings deep inner relief because you are no longer fighting the natural flow of change. There is also grief in this realization, and Buddhism does not ask you to deny it. You may grieve the loss of shared dreams, mutual understanding, or emotional closeness. But grief becomes suffering when it turns into resistance. Letting go in silence means honoring the sadness without turning it into resentment. You understand that someone's inability to grow with you does not make them wrong, and your decision to continue growing does not make you disloyal. Each path is valid, even when they diverge. This understanding softens the heart and prevents bitterness from taking root. Another source of pain arises when others react negatively to your growth. As you become calmer, more self-aware, and less reactive, some people may feel threatened or uncomfortable. They may accuse you of changing, becoming distant, or acting differently. Buddhism teaches that people often respond to growth with resistance because it challenges their own unexamined patterns. Letting go quietly means you do not argue with these perceptions. You do not try to convince others that your growth is good or necessary. You simply continue living in alignment, trusting that your actions speak louder than explanations. Accepting that not everyone will grow with you also requires releasing the fantasy that relationships must last forever to be meaningful. Buddhism teaches impermanence as a sacred truth, not a flaw of existence. Some people are meant to walk with you during your confusion, others during your healing, and others during your strength. When a connection no longer resonates, it does not erase the value it once held. Letting go quietly means carrying the lesson forward instead of clinging to the form. You stop asking why it ended and begin appreciating what it taught you. As this acceptance deepens, something profound changes within you. You feel less need to explain your growth. You feel less pressure to bring everyone along. You become more peaceful in your solitude and more selective with your energy. Buddhism teaches that true companionship arises naturally when there is shared awareness, not forced closeness. When you release attachment to who should stay, you make space for connections that align with who you are becoming. In the stillness that follows this release, the soul finds balance. You no longer feel lonely in your growth because you are no longer fighting it. You walk forward with quiet confidence, trusting that those meant to walk beside you will arrive at the right time. Accepting that not everyone will grow with you is not a loss. It is a return to truth. And in that truth, the heart becomes lighter, the mind becomes clearer, and the journey becomes peaceful once again. 7. Let go of old versions of yourself without shame. One of the most subtle yet powerful forms of suffering comes from clinging to old versions of yourself. Buddhism teaches that the self is not a fixed identity, but a flowing process, constantly shaped by experience, awareness, and understanding. Yet many people remain emotionally attached to who they used to be, not because that version truly represents them now, but because it feels familiar, safe, and known. You remember how you once thought, loved, reacted, and survived, and even when those patterns no longer serve you, you hold on to them out of habit or fear. This attachment quietly blocks healing, because growth requires release, and release feels like loss when identity is involved. Many people carry shame for their past selves. They replay mistakes, regret decisions, and judge themselves harshly for what they did when they were younger, less aware, or emotionally wounded. Buddhism does not teach punishment for past ignorance. It teaches understanding. The version of you that existed before knew only what it knew at the time. It acted based on fear, conditioning, survival, or unmet needs. When you cling to shame, you keep that version alive within you, constantly reopening wounds that are ready to heal. Letting go quietly means replacing judgment with compassion and allowing yourself to evolve without dragging the weight of self-condemnation forward. Holding on to old identities can also appear in subtler forms. You may cling to the role of being the strong one, the fixer, the people-pleaser, or the one who never needs help. These identities may have protected you once, but over time, they become cages. Buddhism teaches that attachment to identity creates suffering because it limits the natural unfolding of the self. Letting go in silence means allowing yourself to change roles, behaviors, and responses without feeling guilty for no longer being who others expect you to be. You are not betraying your past. You are honoring the growth that past made possible. There is also fear in releasing old versions of yourself. You may wonder who you will be without the habits, reactions, or beliefs that once defined you. Buddhism reminds us that emptiness is not absence, it is possibility. When an old identity dissolves, space is created for clarity, wisdom, and balance to emerge. Letting go quietly means trusting this space instead of rushing to fill it with another label or role. You allow yourself to rest in not knowing, understanding that transformation does not require immediate answers. It requires patience and presence. Another source of suffering comes from others holding you to your past. People may remind you of who you were, what you did, or how you used to behave, even when you have grown beyond that version. Buddhism teaches that clinging to others' perceptions ties your identity to their memory, not your reality. Letting go in silence means refusing to argue with outdated images of yourself. You do not defend your growth or explain your evolution. You simply live differently. Over time, consistency speaks louder than explanations, and even if some never update their view of you, your peace no longer depends on their recognition. Letting go of old versions of yourself also means forgiving yourself fully. Forgiveness is not forgetting or excusing harm. It is releasing the emotional charge that keeps you bound to the past. Buddhism teaches that suffering continues as long as we resist what has already happened. When you forgive yourself, you acknowledge that the past cannot be changed, but the relationship you have with it can. Letting go quietly means allowing memory to exist without allowing it to control your present. You stop reliving old pain and begin living from present awareness. As this release deepens, your inner world becomes calmer. You respond instead of react. You observe instead of judge. You begin to notice that peace arises naturally when you stop trying to be who you were or who you think you should be. Buddhism teaches that authenticity is not something you create. It is something you uncover by removing what no longer belongs. Letting go of old selves restores alignment between who you are inside and how you live outside. In this process, you may grieve the old version of yourself. You may feel sadness for the innocence you lost, the mistakes you made, or the pain you endured. Buddhism does not ask you to suppress this grief. It invites you to hold it gently, without turning it into attachment. Letting go quietly means allowing grief to pass through you without building a home in your heart. You learn from the past, but you do not live there. Eventually, something subtle yet profound occurs. You feel lighter, not because life becomes easier, but because you stop carrying unnecessary weight. The inner conflict between who you were and who you are becoming dissolves. You no longer feel fragmented, you feel whole. Buddhism teaches that wholeness arises when resistance ends. When you release old identities with compassion, shame dissolves, clarity emerges, and the soul begins to rest. Letting go of old versions of yourself is not erasing your story. It is completing chapters so new ones can begin. It is honoring the journey without being trapped by it. When you allow yourself to change without shame, you move forward with quiet confidence, grounded awareness, and deep inner peace. This is how the soul heals, not through force, but through gentle release. 8. Stop reacting to everything and learn the power of inner observation. One of the greatest freedoms a human being can experience is the moment they stop reacting automatically to everything around them. Buddhism teaches that most suffering is not caused by events themselves, but by the uncontrolled reactions that arise in the mind when events occur. Words are spoken, situations unfold, people behave unpredictably, and before awareness steps in, the mind reacts with anger, fear, sadness, or defensiveness. This reaction feels immediate and justified, yet it quietly binds you to the very thing that disturbed you. When you react without awareness, you surrender control of your inner world to external circumstances, and peace becomes something fragile that others can easily disturb. The habit of reaction is deeply conditioned. From a young age, many people learn to respond instantly to praise, criticism, conflict, or rejection. Over time, this becomes automatic. Someone says something hurtful, and the body tightens. Someone ignores you, and the mind creates stories. Someone challenges you, and the ego rushes to defend itself. Buddhism teaches that this constant reactivity keeps the mind restless and the heart unsettled. Letting go quietly means interrupting this pattern, not by suppressing emotions, but by observing them before acting on them. Observation is the bridge between stimulus and response. When you observe, you create space. In that space, wisdom arises. Buddhism teaches mindfulness as the practice of witnessing thoughts, emotions, and sensations without immediately identifying with them. When something triggers you, instead of reacting, you pause and notice what is happening within you. You observe the tightening in the chest, the racing thoughts, the urge to speak or withdraw. This awareness does not judge or resist. It simply watches. In doing so, you realize that emotions are temporary visitors, not commands that must be obeyed. Letting go in silence means choosing observation over reaction again and again, even when it feels uncomfortable. At first, this practice can feel unnatural because the mind is used to expressing itself immediately, but Buddhism teaches that true strength lies in restraint, guided by awareness. When you stop reacting, you begin to see situations more clearly. You notice how often your reactions are shaped by past wounds, unmet expectations, or fear rather than present reality. This insight is deeply healing because it allows you to respond from clarity instead of conditioning. Another powerful realization emerges through observation. Not everything requires your response. Many conflicts continue only because both sides keep reacting. When you step back and observe instead of engaging, you break the cycle. Buddhism teaches that silence, when rooted in awareness, can dissolve tension more effectively than words. Letting go quietly means allowing situations to pass without adding fuel to them. You stop defending your ego at every perceived threat, and in doing so, you preserve your inner peace. Observation also transforms your relationship with thoughts. The mind constantly produces opinions, judgments, fears, and narratives. When you react to every thought, you become trapped inside mental noise. Buddhism teaches that thoughts are not facts, they are mental events. Letting go quietly means watching thoughts arise and pass without believing every story they tell. As this practice deepens, the mind becomes quieter, not because thoughts disappear, but because you no longer cling to them. This creates a sense of spaciousness and calm that restores emotional balance. As you cultivate observation, your emotional resilience grows. Situations that once triggered intense reactions begin to lose their power. Criticism no longer wounds as deeply. Disrespect no longer controls your mood. Uncertainty no longer creates panic. Buddhism teaches that freedom is not the absence of difficulty, but the ability to remain centered within it. Letting go quietly means anchoring yourself in awareness rather than being swept away by emotion. This practice also changes how others experience you. When you stop reacting impulsively, your presence becomes calmer and more grounded. People sense that you are not easily shaken, and this alone can shift dynamics. You no longer escalate conflicts or absorb unnecessary emotional weight. Buddhism teaches that inner stillness has a ripple effect. It calms not only your own mind, but the environment around you. Letting go quietly allows you to move through life with dignity and composure. Observation is not detachment from life. It is deeper engagement with reality. When you observe, you see things as they are, not as your fears or desires distort them. This clarity allows for wiser responses when action is truly needed. Buddhism teaches right action, not constant action. Letting go quietly means responding with intention rather than reacting out of habit. Over time, this practice restores trust in yourself, because you know that your responses come from awareness, not impulse. In the stillness created by observation, the soul finds rest. You are no longer fighting every moment or bracing against every interaction. You move with life instead of against it. Buddhism teaches that peace is not something you achieve through effort, but something that reveals itself when unnecessary reactions fall away. When you stop reacting to everything, you reclaim your inner authority, and life begins to feel lighter, steadier, and more harmonious. This is the power of inner observation. It does not make you passive or indifferent. It makes you free, free from emotional exhaustion, free from constant inner conflict, free to live with awareness instead of reactivity. And in that freedom, the soul continues its quiet restoration. 9. Trust silence as the deepest form of healing. One of the most misunderstood teachings on the spiritual path is the power of silence. Many people associate silence with weakness, avoidance, or emotional distance. Yet Buddhism teaches that silence is not the absence of life, but the space where life reorganizes itself. When pain arises, the instinct of the mind is to speak, explain, defend, complain, or seek reassurance. We try to heal by talking, by being heard, by being validated. While expression has its place, there comes a point where words stop helping and begin to prolong suffering. True healing often begins not when you speak more, but when you finally become quiet enough to listen inwardly. Silence allows the nervous system to rest. Much of emotional pain remains active because the mind keeps revisiting it, retelling it, and feeding it with commentary. Buddhism teaches that the mind creates suffering by constantly re-engaging with what has already passed. Letting go quietly means stepping out of this cycle. It means resisting the urge to rehearse your pain, justify your distance, or explain your healing to others. In silence, the mind slowly loosens its grip. The body releases tension. The heart stops bracing itself. This is not suppression. This is restoration. Many people fear silence because silence removes distraction. When there is no noise, no conversation, and no external validation, you are left with yourself. Buddhism teaches that this fear is rooted in avoidance, not danger. When you sit in silence, unresolved emotions may surface. Old memories may arise. Feelings you buried under busyness or explanation may come forward. Letting go quietly means allowing this process without panic. Silence does not create pain. It reveals what was already there, so it can finally dissolve. Silence also protects your energy. Every explanation, argument, or emotional disclosure costs energy. When you are healing, your energy must be conserved, not scattered. Buddhism teaches wise restraint, knowing when to engage and when to withdraw. Letting go quietly means you stop announcing your boundaries, your growth, or your transformation. You do not seek approval for choosing peace. You simply live differently. In silence, your healing becomes deeper because it is no longer shaped by others' opinions or reactions. Another powerful aspect of silence is that it removes you from unnecessary conflict. Many emotional wounds stay open because conversations keep reopening them. You explain yourself, others misunderstand, emotions escalate, and the wound deepens. Buddhism teaches that not every truth needs to be spoken, and not every misunderstanding needs correction. Letting go quietly means allowing people to believe what they choose, while you remain anchored in your own clarity. Silence, in this way, becomes a shield, not a wall. It protects your peace without hardening your heart. Silence also strengthens self-trust. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop outsourcing your sense of rightness. You no longer rely on others to confirm that your feelings, decisions, or boundaries are valid. Buddhism teaches that wisdom arises from direct experience, not constant discussion. Letting go quietly means trusting your inner knowing, even when it is not externally affirmed. This trust stabilizes the mind and creates inner confidence that does not need to be defended. In silence, you also begin to hear subtler truths. The constant noise of reaction and expression drowns out intuition. Buddhism teaches mindfulness as the art of listening to what is beneath thoughts and emotions. When you become quiet, insight arises naturally. You begin to sense when something aligns and when it does not. You recognize patterns without analyzing them endlessly. Silence refines awareness. It sharpens perception. It restores balance between thought and intuition. There is also dignity in silent healing. You do not need to broadcast your pain to prove it exists, and you do not need to narrate your recovery to prove you are growing. Buddhism teaches humility as a form of wisdom. Letting go quietly means allowing your transformation to unfold without performance. You heal for yourself, not for recognition. Over time, your calm presence speaks louder than any explanation ever could. As silence becomes familiar, loneliness begins to dissolve. You realize that silence is not emptiness, but companionship with your own awareness. The fear of being alone fades because you are no longer at war with yourself. Buddhism teaches that inner harmony arises when resistance ends. In silence, resistance softens, acceptance deepens, the soul rests. Eventually, silence becomes your refuge, not because life stops challenging you, but because you no longer meet every challenge with noise. You respond with stillness. You move with clarity. You release without drama. Letting go quietly becomes a way of living, not a temporary strategy. And in this quiet way of being, healing completes itself naturally. Trusting silence does not mean withdrawing from the world. It means engaging with the world from a place of inner calm. It means knowing when words are needed and when they are not. Buddhism teaches that the deepest wisdom is often wordless. When you trust silence, you allow life to flow without interference. You stop forcing closure. You stop demanding explanations. You stop clinging to noise. And in that stillness, the soul restores itself completely. This is the final lesson of letting go. Not dramatic release, not loud transformation, but quiet, steady, compassionate silence. And within that silence, you finally return to yourself. 10. Allow life to be as it is, and let peace become your natural state. The final stage of letting go is not about releasing one person, one memory, or one situation. It is about releasing resistance itself. Buddhism teaches that suffering does not arise because life brings change, uncertainty, or loss, but because the mind fights what is already happening. You want life to move faster, people to behave differently, the past to be undone, and the future to arrive with guarantees. Without realizing it, you spend enormous emotional energy pushing against reality. This inner resistance creates tension, exhaustion, and quiet despair. Letting go completely means allowing life to be as it is, without constantly demanding that it be something else. Allowing does not mean approving of everything that happens, nor does it mean passivity or weakness. Buddhism makes a clear distinction between acceptance and surrendering your values. Acceptance is seeing reality clearly without adding unnecessary mental conflict to it. When you allow life to unfold without resistance, the mind stops struggling. You no longer argue internally with what has already occurred. You stop replaying conversations, regretting decisions, and imagining alternate outcomes. Instead, you meet each moment with presence. This presence becomes the foundation of peace. Much of emotional pain comes from living in opposition to the present moment. You compare what is to what should have been, or what might be someday. Buddhism teaches that the present moment is the only place where life actually exists. When you reject it, you reject life itself. Letting go quietly means releasing this rejection. You allow the moment to be imperfect, incomplete, and uncertain. In doing so, you discover that peace does not require perfect conditions. Peace arises when resistance ends. As you allow life to be as it is, your relationship with control begins to change. You realize how much anxiety came from trying to manage outcomes, people, and timing. Buddhism teaches that control is largely an illusion, and clinging to it creates suffering. Letting go means trusting life's intelligence instead of constantly trying to override it. You still act with care and intention, but you stop demanding certainty. When control loosens, the body relaxes, the breath deepens, the mind softens. This is not defeat, this is alignment. Another profound shift occurs when you stop interpreting everything personally. Many people experience emotional pain because they see every setback, silence, or loss as a reflection of their worth. Buddhism teaches that life is not happening to you. It is happening through conditions that are constantly changing. Letting go quietly means releasing the belief that everything is about you. When this belief dissolves, emotional weight lifts. You respond to life instead of internalizing it. Peace becomes more stable because it is no longer dependent on constant reassurance. Allowing life also means allowing emotions to arise and pass without clinging to them. Happiness comes and goes. Sadness appears and fades. Anger arises and dissolves. Buddhism teaches that emotions are natural movements of the mind, not permanent identities. Suffering begins when you grasp pleasant emotions and resist unpleasant ones. Letting go completely means allowing all emotions without building a story around them. You feel without drowning. You observe without suppressing. Over time, emotions lose their power to destabilize you. They become waves instead of storms. As this deep acceptance takes root, your sense of self becomes lighter. You no longer define yourself by your past, your struggles, or your roles. You are not constantly narrating your life or seeking meaning through comparison. Buddhism teaches non-attachment to identity as a path to freedom. Letting go quietly means allowing yourself to simply be, without constantly trying to improve, fix, or justify yourself. In this simplicity, peace becomes natural, not forced. There is also great healing in allowing others to be as they are. Much emotional exhaustion comes from trying to change people, convince them, or wait for them to become different. Buddhism teaches that suffering increases when we demand that others fulfill our expectations. Letting go completely means releasing this demand. You stop waiting for apologies, understanding, or closure. You allow others to walk their own paths, even when those paths diverge from yours. This does not harden the heart, it frees it. Compassion deepens when expectation fades. As you allow life to unfold, silence becomes more comfortable. You no longer feel the need to fill space with explanation or distraction. You trust stillness. You trust time. You trust your own capacity to remain present. Buddhism teaches that peace is not something you create through effort. It is something that reveals itself when interference stops. Letting go completely means stepping out of your own way. Over time, this way of being transforms how you move through the world. You listen more and react less. You choose carefully where your energy goes. You no longer chase what drains you or cling to what is leaving. You walk forward with quiet confidence, grounded in awareness rather than fear. Life may still bring challenges, but they no longer shatter you. They pass through you, leaving wisdom instead of wounds. This is the completion of letting go, not a dramatic ending, not a sudden awakening, but a gentle settling into truth. You stop fighting life. You stop fighting yourself. You stop fighting the moment. And, in that surrender, peace becomes your natural state. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer at war with what is. This is how the soul heals completely, not through force, control, or explanation, but through deep allowance. When you let life be, life supports you. When you stop resisting, clarity arrives. When you let go fully, quietly, and with compassion, you finally come home to yourself. 11. Stop searching for closure and become your own resolution. One of the most overlooked sources of suffering is the belief that peace will arrive only after closure. Many people remain emotionally tied to the past because they are waiting for explanations, apologies, clarity, or final conversations that may never come. Buddhism teaches that this waiting keeps the heart suspended between what was and what might have been. Closure becomes a condition for peace, and peace is delayed indefinitely. Letting go quietly means understanding that closure is not something others give you. It is something you allow yourself. The mind often believes that if you could just understand why something ended, why someone changed, or why pain occurred, you would finally be able to move on. But Buddhism reminds us that understanding does not always heal, and answers do not always bring peace. Sometimes explanations reopen wounds instead of closing them. Sometimes hearing the truth does not comfort the heart, but unsettles it further. Letting go completely means releasing the belief that resolution must come from outside you. You stop chasing answers and begin resting in acceptance. Searching for closure often keeps old pain alive. You replay conversations that never happened. Imagine what you would say if given one more chance, and rehearse responses in your mind. This mental activity keeps emotional attachment intact. Buddhism teaches that suffering continues as long as the mind resists what has already ended. Letting go quietly means recognizing that the past does not need to be resolved in words for it to be released. Sometimes the ending itself is the closure. Sometimes silence is the final answer. There is also a deeper attachment hidden beneath the search for closure, the attachment to being validated. You want your pain to be acknowledged, your feelings to be confirmed, and your experience to be recognized as real. While this desire is human, Buddhism teaches that depending on others to validate your inner experience gives them power over your healing. Letting go means honoring your own experience without waiting for agreement. You learn to trust your feelings without needing permission to feel them. Becoming your own resolution means allowing life to remain unanswered in certain places. It means accepting that not every story will end neatly, and not every wound will receive explanation. Buddhism teaches that uncertainty is not something to be solved. It is something to be lived with awareness. When you stop demanding clarity from the past, your energy returns to the present. You are no longer trapped in what could have been. You are available for what is. Another layer of healing unfolds when you stop expecting apologies. Many people remain emotionally bound to others because they are waiting for accountability, remorse, or acknowledgement. Buddhism teaches that clinging to expectations of apology ties your peace to someone else's readiness to change. Letting go quietly means releasing this dependency. You understand that someone's inability to apologize does not invalidate your pain. You no longer need their remorse to heal. Forgiveness, in this sense, is not excusing harm, but freeing yourself from waiting. As you become your own resolution, your relationship with memory changes. Memories may still arise, but they no longer control your emotional state. You stop reopening old wounds to check if they still hurt. Buddhism teaches that pain fades when attention softens. Letting go quietly means allowing memories to pass without engaging them. Over time, they lose their emotional charge. What once felt sharp becomes distant. What once felt heavy becomes light. There is also deep dignity in self-resolution. You no longer seek dramatic endings or emotional confrontations to prove that something mattered. You carry your experiences with quiet respect. Buddhism teaches that wisdom matures in silence. Letting go quietly means allowing your healing to be private, internal, and self-directed. You stop explaining your closure. You stop defending your distance. You simply move forward. As this inner resolution deepens, trust begins to replace anxiety. You trust yourself to survive endings. You trust yourself to live without answers. You trust yourself to remain whole even when things feel unfinished. Buddhism teaches that wholeness does not require completeness of story. It requires completeness of presence. When you are fully present, the past loses its grip. Becoming your own resolution also changes how you approach future relationships and experiences. You no longer cling desperately or attach prematurely. You understand impermanence not as a threat, but as truth. This understanding creates emotional maturity. You love without possession. You connect without dependency. You release without resentment. Buddhism teaches that freedom is loving without fear of loss, because you are not using love to fill emptiness. In this state, peace no longer feels fragile. It does not depend on how others behave, what they say, or whether they return. Peace becomes stable because it is rooted in self-awareness. Letting go quietly means standing firmly in your own presence. You do not need closure because you are complete without it. You do not need answers because you are at peace with not knowing. This is the final depth of letting go, not forgetting, not denying, not suppressing, but releasing the need for resolution outside yourself. When you become your own resolution, life no longer feels unfinished. You carry your experiences as wisdom instead of wounds, and in that quiet acceptance, the soul finally rests. 12. Release the need to be understood, and let inner peace become enough. One of the most subtle attachments that keeps the soul restless is the desire to be understood. Many people do not realize how much emotional energy they spend hoping others will finally see their intentions, recognize their pain, or acknowledge their growth. Buddhism teaches that this longing is rooted in attachment to external validation, and wherever validation is required, suffering quietly waits. The wish to be understood may feel innocent, even natural, but when peace depends on it, the heart becomes fragile. Letting go quietly means accepting a profound truth. Not everyone will understand you, and you do not need them to. From an early age, people learn to explain themselves in order to belong. You learn to justify your feelings, clarify your choices, and defend your decisions so that others will not judge you harshly. Over time, this habit becomes automatic. You begin explaining even when no explanation is owed. You speak even when silence would protect your peace. Buddhism teaches that this constant need to be understood pulls you outward, away from your own center. Each explanation is an unconscious request for approval, and when approval does not come, disappointment follows. Letting go quietly means ending this cycle. There is a deep freedom in realizing that misunderstanding is not always a failure of communication. Sometimes it is simply a difference in awareness. Buddhism teaches that every person sees the world through the lens of their own conditioning, fears, wounds, and expectations. No matter how clearly you speak, some people will hear only what aligns with their inner world. When you accept this, you stop exhausting yourself trying to translate your truth into something others can digest. You allow your truth to exist without forcing it to be accepted. Releasing the need to be understood does not mean becoming cold, withdrawn, or emotionally closed. It means becoming rooted. You still speak when it is necessary and meaningful, but you no longer speak to convince, prove, or justify yourself. Buddhism teaches right speech, not excessive speech. Letting go quietly means choosing words with intention and silence with wisdom. You begin to notice that many explanations were never meant to create understanding, but to reduce your own discomfort in the face of others' judgments. When you release this need, discomfort loses its power over you. Another layer of suffering dissolves when you stop expecting emotional recognition from specific people. Many individuals carry quiet resentment because the people they hoped would understand them never did. They wait for empathy that does not arrive, and each unmet expectation deepens the wound. Buddhism teaches that attachment to expectation is the root of disappointment. Letting go quietly means allowing people to be limited without turning their limitations into your burden. You stop waiting for emotional confirmation and begin offering understanding to yourself instead. As you release this need, your relationship with silence transforms. Silence no longer feels like rejection or invisibility. It feels like home. Buddhism teaches that silence is not emptiness, but fullness without noise. In silence, you no longer feel compelled to narrate your experience or defend your choices. You trust that your life does not need commentary to be valid. This trust stabilizes the mind and soothes the heart. There is also deep strength in being misunderstood and remaining peaceful. When you no longer need to correct every false assumption or defend every misinterpretation, you reclaim immense emotional energy. Buddhism teaches non-attachment to views, both your own and others. Letting go quietly means allowing opinions to exist without allowing them to define you. You realize that being misunderstood does not diminish your integrity. It simply reveals where resonance is absent. As this practice deepens, your inner voice becomes clearer. You begin to hear yourself more distinctly because the noise of others' expectations fades. Buddhism teaches that wisdom arises when the mind is uncluttered. Letting go quietly means trusting your inner compass, even when it is not externally validated. This trust becomes the foundation of inner peace. You no longer feel lost when others disagree with you. You remain steady because you are aligned with yourself. Releasing the need to be understood also softens the ego. The ego craves recognition, agreement, and affirmation. Buddhism teaches that clinging to ego creates suffering because it ties identity to external perception. Letting go quietly means loosening this grip. You stop measuring your worth through reactions, responses, or acknowledgement. You become less reactive and more present. Peace arises not because everyone understands you, but because you no longer need them to. This shift also changes how you show up in relationships. You listen more deeply without preparing defenses. You speak more honestly without oversharing. You respect others' perspectives without absorbing them. Buddhism teaches balanced engagement, where connection does not require self-abandonment. Letting go quietly allows relationships to breathe. Some deepen, some fade, and you accept both without resistance. Over time, the desire to be understood dissolves into a deeper satisfaction, the peace of self-acceptance. You understand yourself, you honor your journey, you respect your growth. Buddhism teaches that inner harmony arises when the self is no longer divided against itself. When you stop seeking understanding outside, you find wholeness within. This is not isolation, this is inner maturity. You still connect, love, and communicate, but from a place of fullness rather than need. Letting go quietly means standing comfortably in your truth without demanding agreement. In this state, misunderstandings lose their sting, silence loses its fear, and peace becomes enough. This is the quiet completion of detachment, not withdrawal from life, but freedom within it. When you release the need to be understood, you stop explaining your existence and begin living it. And in that simplicity, the soul settles into deep, unshakable calm. 13. Let go of the need to control life and learn the art of surrender. One of the deepest roots of human suffering is the belief that peace comes from control. Many people spend their lives trying to manage outcomes, predict events, shape relationships, and secure the future, believing that if everything stays within their grasp, pain can be avoided. Buddhism teaches the opposite. It teaches that clinging to control is what creates fear, anxiety, and exhaustion, because life is, by its very nature, uncertain and ever-changing. Letting go quietly means releasing the illusion that you can control life and learning instead how to move with it. Control often disguises itself as responsibility, planning, or care, but beneath it lies fear. Fear of loss, fear of uncertainty, fear of being hurt again. The mind tries to protect itself by tightening its grip, believing that vigilance will prevent suffering. Yet Buddhism reminds us that suffering does not come from uncertainty, but from resisting it. When you try to control life, you place yourself in constant conflict with reality. Life moves, changes, and unfolds according to countless conditions beyond your influence. Fighting this truth drains the soul. Letting go of control does not mean becoming careless or passive. Buddhism does not teach resignation. It teaches surrender with awareness. Surrender is not giving up on life. It is giving up the struggle against life. You still act, plan, and choose, but you do so without attachment to how things must turn out. Letting go quietly means doing what is within your reach and releasing what is not. This shift alone dissolves immense inner tension. Much anxiety comes from living in imagined futures. You anticipate problems that have not arrived, rehearse conversations that may never happen, and worry about outcomes that are still forming. Buddhism teaches that the mind creates suffering by leaving the present moment. Letting go quietly means returning to what is here, now, without dragging the weight of tomorrow into today. When you stop trying to control the future, the present moment becomes lighter and more spacious. Control also shows up strongly in relationships. You want people to behave in certain ways, meet certain expectations, and fulfill roles you have unconsciously assigned to them. When they do not, disappointment arises. Buddhism teaches that attachment to expectations is a source of suffering. Letting go quietly means allowing people to be who they are, not who you need them to be. This does not mean tolerating harm or abandoning boundaries. It means releasing the inner struggle of trying to reshape others. When you stop controlling, compassion naturally grows. Another layer of control exists in how people try to control their own emotions. They resist sadness, suppress anger, and chase happiness, believing that certain emotions are acceptable while others are failures. Buddhism teaches that emotions are natural phenomena, not enemies. Letting go quietly means allowing emotions to arise and pass without trying to manage or judge them. When you stop controlling your inner experience, emotions move through you more gently and dissolve more quickly. Surrender also transforms your relationship with mistakes and failure. When you cling to control, every mistake feels like a personal flaw, and every failure feels catastrophic. Buddhism teaches impermanence and learning through experience. Letting go quietly means accepting missteps as part of the path, not deviations from it. You stop punishing yourself for not getting everything right. You learn, adjust, and continue without carrying unnecessary shame. As surrender deepens, trust begins to replace fear. Not blind optimism, but grounded trust in your ability to respond to whatever arises. Buddhism teaches that true security does not come from controlling life, but from knowing you can meet life as it is. Letting go quietly means trusting your resilience instead of trying to guarantee comfort. This trust stabilizes the mind and restores confidence that is not dependent on certainty. There is also a profound peace that comes when you stop trying to control your own healing. Many people pressure themselves to move on faster, feel better sooner, and become stronger immediately. Buddhism teaches patience and compassion toward the self. Letting go quietly means allowing healing to unfold at its own pace. You stop measuring progress. You stop comparing your journey to others. You trust that transformation happens naturally when resistance ends. As control loosens, the body relaxes, the breath deepens, the mind softens. You begin to experience life directly instead of managing it mentally. Buddhism teaches that presence is the doorway to peace. Letting go quietly means stepping out of constant mental effort and into simple awareness. You notice the rhythm of life, the subtle joys, the quiet moments of clarity that were previously drowned out by worry. Eventually, surrender becomes a way of being. You no longer feel the need to grip tightly or brace yourself against uncertainty. You move with life instead of against it. Challenges still arise, but they do not dominate your inner world. Loss still occurs, but it does not break you. Buddhism teaches that freedom is not the absence of difficulty, but the absence of resistance. This is the quiet mastery of life, not control, but cooperation, not force, but flow. When you let go of the need to control, you return to harmony with existence itself. Life becomes less of a battle and more of a journey, and in that surrender, the soul finds the deepest form of peace, not because everything is secure, but because you are no longer fighting what cannot be controlled. This is how letting go completes itself, not through effort, not through struggle, but through surrender. And in surrender, life finally feels light enough to carry. 14. Become emotionally self-sufficient and let peace come from within. One of the final and most liberating stages of letting go is becoming emotionally self-sufficient. Buddhism teaches that suffering continues as long as your emotional stability depends on external sources. When your peace rises and falls based on how others treat you, what they say, or whether they stay or leave, your inner world remains fragile. Emotional dependence keeps the heart in a constant state of negotiation with life. Letting go quietly means learning how to become your own source of stability, so peace is no longer borrowed from people, circumstances, or outcomes, but cultivated from within. Many people confuse emotional self-sufficiency with isolation or emotional coldness. Buddhism does not teach withdrawal from human connection. It teaches freedom within connection. Emotional self-sufficiency means you can love deeply without needing others to complete you. You can care without clinging. You can connect without losing yourself. When you rely on others to regulate your emotions, disappointment becomes inevitable, because no one can consistently meet the unspoken expectations you place upon them. Letting go quietly means releasing these expectations and taking responsibility for your own inner balance. From early life, many individuals learn to seek comfort, validation, and security externally. When praised, they feel worthy. When criticized, they feel diminished. When loved, they feel whole. When rejected, they feel broken. Buddhism teaches that this pattern creates endless suffering because it hands your emotional well-being to forces you cannot control. Emotional self-sufficiency begins when you recognize that feelings arise from within, not from outside events. Letting go quietly means observing emotions as internal experiences rather than reactions dictated by others. Becoming emotionally self-sufficient requires learning how to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to escape it. Many people rush to distraction, reassurance, or explanation the moment an uncomfortable emotion arises. Buddhism teaches that avoidance strengthens suffering. Letting go quietly means allowing discomfort to exist without labeling it as a problem. When you stay present with emotions instead of fleeing from them, they lose intensity. You realize that emotions move naturally when they are not resisted. This understanding builds inner trust and emotional resilience. Another key aspect of emotional self-sufficiency is releasing the belief that someone else must understand or validate your feelings for them to be real. Buddhism teaches that your experience is valid simply because it is experienced. Letting go quietly means honoring your emotions without seeking confirmation. You no longer need others to agree with you in order to feel secure. This shift creates deep inner confidence because your sense of self no longer depends on external approval. As emotional independence develops, relationships transform. You stop seeking emotional rescue from others. You stop expecting people to fix your pain or fill your emptiness. Buddhism teaches that clinging to others for emotional fulfillment creates attachment, and attachment leads to suffering. Letting go quietly means approaching relationships from fullness rather than need. You share joy instead of seeking it. You offer presence instead of asking for reassurance. This creates healthier, more balanced connections. Emotional self-sufficiency also softens fear of loss. When your peace does not depend on someone staying, you are no longer terrified of them leaving. Buddhism teaches impermanence not as a threat, but as a truth that frees the heart. Letting go quietly means accepting that all connections may change, while trusting your ability to remain whole regardless. This acceptance removes desperation from relationships and replaces it with calm appreciation. There is also deep healing in becoming emotionally self-sufficient during solitude. Many people fear being alone because they associate solitude with emptiness or abandonment. Buddhism teaches that solitude can be nourishing when the relationship with oneself is kind. Letting go quietly means learning to be present with yourself, without judgment. You listen inwardly. You observe your thoughts without attacking them. Over time, solitude becomes a refuge instead of a threat. You realize that being alone does not mean being lonely when inner companionship is strong. As peace becomes internal, reactions soften. Criticism no longer destabilizes you. Praise no longer inflates you. Situations lose their emotional charge because your center remains steady. Buddhism teaches equanimity as the balanced mind that is not shaken by pleasure or pain. Letting go quietly means cultivating this balance through awareness, patience, and self-compassion. Emotional self-sufficiency does not make you numb, it makes you stable. Another profound shift occurs when you stop expecting life to make you happy. Many people move through life waiting for the right circumstances, relationships, or achievements to bring fulfillment. Buddhism teaches that happiness based on conditions is temporary. Letting go quietly means creating contentment independent of outcomes. You appreciate what is present without demanding it satisfy you completely. This contentment is gentle, not ecstatic, but it is steady and sustainable. As emotional self-sufficiency deepens, gratitude arises naturally, not because life is perfect, but because you are no longer dependent on perfection to feel at ease. Buddhism teaches that gratitude emerges when craving fades. Letting go quietly means noticing simple moments of peace, clarity, and stillness that were always available but previously overlooked. These moments accumulate into a stable sense of well-being. Eventually, emotional self-sufficiency becomes a way of living. You engage with life openly, without clinging or avoidance. You experience emotions fully, without being controlled by them. You love without fear of loss. You stand alone without feeling empty. Buddhism teaches that true freedom is inner freedom. Letting go quietly means embodying this freedom without needing to prove it. This is the quiet strength of emotional self-sufficiency. Not detachment from life, but deep presence within it. Not rejection of connection, but liberation from dependency. When peace comes from within, life no longer feels like something you must manage emotionally. You move through it with calm awareness, steady breath, and gentle confidence. And in this state, the soul is no longer searching, it is resting. 15. Live without attachment and let life touch you without owning you. The final refinement of letting go is not about distancing yourself from life, but about learning how to live fully without attachment. Buddhism teaches that attachment is not love, not care, and not presence. Attachment is the belief that something must remain a certain way for you to be at peace. When you attach, you cling to people, outcomes, identities, and emotions, fearing their loss because you believe they complete you. Letting go quietly means understanding that life can be experienced deeply without being possessed, controlled, or held tightly. This realization transforms the way you move through the world. Living without attachment does not mean becoming indifferent or emotionally closed. Buddhism does not teach detachment as numbness. It teaches non-attachment as freedom. You still feel joy, sadness, love, and connection, but you do not cling to them. You allow experiences to arise, be lived fully, and then pass naturally. When attachment dissolves, fear loses its grip, because fear is rooted in the belief that something essential can be taken away. Letting go quietly means recognizing that nothing external is required for your inner completeness. Much suffering comes from the belief that happiness must be held onto. When something good happens, the mind immediately worries about losing it. This fear quietly poisons joy. Buddhism teaches impermanence not to make life feel fragile, but to help you appreciate each moment without clinging. Letting go quietly means enjoying what is present without demanding that it stay. You allow happiness to be experienced fully without gripping it. When happiness fades, you do not collapse, because your peace was never dependent on it. Non-attachment also transforms how you experience pain. When difficulty arises, attachment intensifies suffering by adding resistance and fear. You ask why this is happening, how long it will last, and what it means about you. Buddhism teaches that pain is part of life, but suffering comes from fighting it. Letting go quietly means allowing pain to exist without turning it into an identity or a story. You feel it, learn from it, and allow it to pass. Pain no longer defines you because you do not cling to it. Living without attachment also reshapes your relationship with people. You love without possession, you care without control, you connect without fear of loss. Buddhism teaches that attachment in relationships creates anxiety, jealousy, and emotional dependence. Letting go quietly means allowing others to be free while remaining present with them. You stop trying to secure love through fear. You trust that connection does not require ownership. When someone stays, you appreciate them. When someone leaves, you grieve without resentment. This balance brings deep emotional maturity. Another layer of attachment exists in identity. Many people cling to roles, labels, achievements, and narratives about who they are. Buddhism teaches that identity is fluid, not fixed. Letting go quietly means allowing yourself to change without clinging to old definitions. You are not your past, your success, your failure, or your reputation. When identity loosens, self-judgment fades. You live more lightly, without constantly protecting an image. Non-attachment also frees you from comparison. When you attach to how life should look, you measure yourself against others. Buddhism teaches that comparison arises from craving and insecurity. Letting go quietly means honoring your own path without needing it to resemble anyone else's. You stop competing with timelines, achievements, or appearances. Peace deepens because you are no longer chasing external markers of worth. As non-attachment deepens, gratitude becomes natural. Not forced gratitude, but quiet appreciation. You notice life as it is, without demanding more. Buddhism teaches that contentment arises when craving fades. Letting go quietly means appreciating what is present without needing it to fulfill you completely. This contentment is stable, gentle, and enduring. Living without attachment also changes how you approach the future. You still plan, dream, and create, but without desperation. Buddhism teaches wise intention without clinging to results. Letting go quietly means walking forward with openness instead of fear. You trust that whatever unfolds, you can meet it with awareness. This trust replaces anxiety with calm confidence. In this state, peace no longer feels fragile. It does not depend on circumstances aligning or people behaving as expected. Peace becomes your natural background. Life continues to change, challenge, and surprise you, but it no longer throws you off balance. Buddhism teaches equanimity as the mind that remains steady in pleasure and pain. Letting go quietly means embodying this balance without effort. Eventually, non-attachment becomes invisible. You are no longer practicing it consciously. You simply live. You engage with life fully, without gripping or resisting. You allow experiences to touch you without owning you. Joy passes through you. Pain passes through you. Love flows through you. Nothing sticks long enough to disturb your center. This is the quiet completion of the path. Not withdrawal from the world, but freedom within it. Not loss of feeling, but liberation from fear. When you live without attachment, life becomes lighter, relationships become healthier, and the mind becomes peaceful. You no longer chase peace. You no longer protect it. Peace is simply there. This is what it means to let go completely. Not to lose life, but to finally meet it without fear. And in that meeting, the soul rests in deep, unshakable calm. At the end of this journey, there is nothing new you need to add to yourself. There is only what you are finally ready to put down. Buddhism teaches that peace is not something you achieve through effort, struggle, or self-improvement, but something that remains when unnecessary weight is released. Throughout these lessons, you have not been asked to become someone else. You have been invited to stop holding on to what was never meant to stay. The suffering you carried did not come from life itself, but from resistance, attachment, expectation, and fear. And healing did not arrive through force, but through quiet understanding. Letting go quietly is not a dramatic act. It does not announce itself. It does not seek recognition. It happens internally, when you stop explaining yourself, stop chasing closure, stop controlling outcomes, stop waiting to be understood, and stop needing life to be different in order to feel whole. One by one, the attachments loosen. The grip softens. The struggle fades. What remains is not emptiness, but space. And in that space, the soul begins to rest. You may notice that peace now feels different. It is not excitement. It is not escape. It is not the absence of difficulty. It is steadiness. It is the ability to remain present even when life is uncertain. It is the quiet confidence that whatever arises, you can meet it without losing yourself. Buddhism teaches that this kind of peace is unshakable because it does not depend on people staying, situations working out, or the future being predictable. It depends only on awareness and acceptance. You no longer need to carry the past like a burden. You no longer need to fear the future like a threat. The present moment is enough. You have learned how to live without gripping joy, without resisting pain, and without clinging to identity. You have learned that love does not require possession, that silence is not weakness, and that surrender is not defeat. You have learned that the deepest form of strength is inner stillness. As you move forward, life will continue to change. People will come and go. Circumstances will rise and fall. Emotions will appear and dissolve. But you are no longer searching for stability outside yourself. You have cultivated a quiet refuge within. When challenges arise, you will not rush to react. You will observe. When loss occurs, you will grieve without collapsing. When joy appears, you will enjoy it without fear of losing it. This is not indifference. This is wisdom. Letting go quietly does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop suffering unnecessarily. It means you stop abandoning yourself to keep others comfortable. It means you stop demanding certainty from a world that is constantly changing. And in that release, something profound happens. Life becomes lighter, the heart becomes softer, the mind becomes clearer. You move through the world without armor because you no longer believe you must protect yourself from life. This is the quiet end of striving, the quiet end of chasing, the quiet end of resistance. Not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer at war with what is unresolved. You have become your own refuge. You have become your own resolution. And so there is nothing left to do but live, simply, gently, presently. Let life touch you without owning you. Let moments pass without clinging. Let silence guide you when words are no longer needed. Let go quietly, not once, but again and again, until peace is no longer something you seek, but something you recognize as your natural state. This is not the end of the journey. It is the end of unnecessary suffering, and in that ending, the soul finally rests.